The years 1929 and 1930, considered by most the end of the silent era. There are, of course, other silent films that will continue to come out after these years, but this is generally considered the end of this era. Sadly, these years also mark the deaths of Segundo de Chimón and Paul Lely. Segundo de Chimón was a Spanish filmmaker who I often referred to as a George Méliès ripoff. However, he did make some good films, and ultimately he is massively overshadowed by George Méliès, so he does deserve some credit. Segundo de Chimón died of a heart attack aged 57. Paul Lely was a German filmmaker who most famously made The Man Who Laughs, a film that inspired Joker. However, I think that film is a lot more than that. It's a very good film. And in his short career, he was a key figure in German Expressionism. Paul Lely died of sepsis, aged 44. Anyway, as per tradition, I have seen 22 films from this time period. There is a lot of Laurel and Hardy on this list, and that was really difficult for me to figure out because on the one hand, this is my top 10, so I want to put lots of Laurel and Hardy on because it's my top 10. But at the same time, I don't want to do top 10 Laurel and Hardy films. And are these even really proper films? I mean, they're shorts. Here are some good Laurel and Hardy films that probably should have made the cut, but I just couldn't squeeze it in with all the other great stuff going on. Anyway, let's get into it. At number 10 we have Berth Marks. This is one of Laurel and Hardy's first talking films. It's not quite their first, but I think this is definitely one where they really got used to the sound format. There's ambient sounds like the trains, just to give the film a bit of atmosphere. There's dialogue and jokes that could just not be made in the silent format.
Thank you.
I really enjoy the lack of narrative direction in this one. It's a very simple plot. Stan and Ollie are musicians and they're getting a train to Pottsville. That's it, there's nothing more than that. As an audience, we're just witness to how Stan and Ollie basically can't do anything without causing some kind of chaos. The way that dialogue and character moments are used for comedy just shows a really immediate understanding of the sound format. They knew exactly how to make sound comedy films work so quickly, right off the bat. One of my favourite scenes in this is probably them trying to get into bed. It's just an infuriatingly long sequence of them pulling sheets and squirming around. It's like, God, come on, like, just get into bed. It's so frustrating and such a great comedic sketch in that, right? Overall, I love the simplicity of this. There's very little plot development, but all these little nuggets of comedy that you get throughout makes it a worthwhile watch. At number 9, we have Man with a Movie Camera. So this film's pretty ambitious. It's got no story, no characters, no writing, plot, anything like that. The idea is, this is film at its purest. So this guy's got his camera and he's just going around the city and filming stuff and expressing himself through visual effects and editing. Through this, he manages to explore just modern life, industrialism. It's a fascinating perspective, and I'd highly recommend pairing this film with another film, Caro Squazzi, which is basically the same film but for the 80s. If I'm being completely honest, I do think this film drags in places. There's a lot of great moments and I enjoy the themes and the way that it says so much about society with nothing but film techniques. It guides you along in a way where you can start to interpret it and read it. It does a good job of conveying that this is a turning point in society, that all the traditional elements are going and all these new things are happening. It's a really valuable perspective of that time period. However, this is an hour long and I think there's a better 40-minute film in there. If you're into your history in any way, this is a great insight into the time period. A very important documentary film. It just needs a bit of whittling down to really hit, I think. At number 8 we have Night Owls, another Laurel and Hardy film. The story is basically a corrupt cop is under fire because there's burglaries going around and he's done nothing to really sort that. So he decides he's going to frame some people, and who better as a frame than these two idiots sat on a bench, Stan and Ollie, the two least capable people for the job. Sound, again, is being used really well in this. The absence of sound versus sound really highlights how bad they are at stealth.
Don't shush me.
It makes a real point of conveying that Ollie is actually just as much as an idiot as Stan. Stan might be the surface level idiot, but Ollie is just as stupid through his own arrogance. And I think this is the first film where that's properly highlighted.
Oh, it's the cat, sir. Let's pretend we're cats.
The scene where they're trying to break into the house through the front door radiates that same frustration that you get watching them struggle to get into the bed in Berth Marks. But I think this is even funnier. Like, Berth Marks, okay, it was very long and slow and annoying, but this one is just like, oh god, why are you doing that? Oh, the door, the window. That rhythm and tempo of all these jokes and sketches and slapstick moments. What a strong way for these guys to start the 1930s. At number 7 we have Chien Andalou, a film by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali. Buñuel definitely being the key filmmaker in here, with iconic artist Salvador Dali bringing surrealism to it. The combination works really well, and this is one of the first notable surrealist films. Last episode I discussed A Page of Madness, which also tried to tackle surrealism in film. I found that one a lot harder to get into. And I think that's mostly down to the pacing. This one just works so fast. Lots of jumping images. You'll see an eye being sliced open, and then you'll see the same kind of image repeated with a moon and a cloud. What does that mean? I don't know, but it's cool. Then there's ants coming out of a hand, and then there's a man molesting a woman. Like, what does that mean? I don't know, again, but it's cool. It feels like all these fragments of ideas are just sort of cut together and sequenced in an interesting way that really keeps you engaged, and you're constantly sort of drawing connections, like, okay, ants coming out of a hand, molestation, drawing parallels, drawing themes, drawing ideas. It keeps you right into it. What's the right conclusion? What's the wrong conclusion? We will never know, and that's the whole point. That energy, pace, and poignant runtime is key to how this works so well, I think. Page of Madness just lingers and drags, and I get that that was probably intentional to create a sense of dread or whatever.
What we really need to do is create a powerful sense of dread. See, the longer the note, the more dread.
But this one is just a lot more fun, and though surrealism films will get a lot better, I think Dali and Buñuel offered a great model for people to go off. At number 6 we have Blackmail. This is the first Alfred Hitchcock film I've discussed. I don't really feel like I need to introduce who Alfred Hitchcock is, but I'm going to anyway. Basically, he's a British director, and he made some of the most influential and striking Hollywood hits, mostly in the 50s and 60s. So this one is a very early film of his, and it's also the first British talkie film. I went in not sure if this film had sound or not, and for a moment I thought this was silent, but then suddenly it just jumps straight into it and the sound starts working as they enter the bar. I think the way that sound was introduced in this was a lot better than how it was introduced in The Jazz Singer. When production on this film started, it was a silent film, and so they had to reshoot a lot of sequences with sound. One of the main hurdles that came with that was with the leading woman, Annie Hondra. She had a very thick Czech accent, so they had to dub over her, and the technology for dubbing just was not there for that time. However, I do think it did a very good job.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Frank.
Well, dear?
I've been waiting here half an hour for you.
The sound in this is mostly seamless and very effectively used. It doesn't really show that it started off silent. When I talked about Lights of New York, I said that it basically felt like a boring theatre play. This is not that at all. There's some really good shots in this. It's overall shot super well, and the sound just works alongside that as an extra layer. It really proves that sound doesn't have to take away from film as a visual medium. It's possible. We can make good sound films. There's some really heavy stuff going on in this film. I think Hitchcock very quickly realised, now we have sound, we don't need to show these things. We can use sound and different shot types to create tension. Sound stuff aside, historical significance aside, this film has a good story. It's based on a play of the same name. I enjoyed the characters a lot, some of them were quite deceiving. I enjoyed seeing how Alice coped with the side effects of committing a murder. I would say that the second half of this film was a bit slower and a bit less interesting than the first half. All good stuff on a narrative level, but I think the standout feature here is Hitchcock's directing. Overall, it's a good story that's presented amazingly and uses sound in a really cool way. This is definitive proof that sound can work for dramatic films as well as just studio-bound comedies like Laurel and Hardy. At number 5 we have Laughing Gravy. Oh god, another Laurel and Hardy film. This time Stan and Ollie, they are staying at a hotel. It's a very stormy, snowy night and they have a dog which they're not allowed. When the landlord finds out that they have the dog, he kicks them out and they're like, It can't do that, it's snowing outside, you cannot kick out a dog in the snow, and so naturally they go on a rescue mission. In terms of the filmmaking, I think this is pretty spot on. It's a convincing set, the snow effects are really good, and what really ties the atmosphere together is that music. You get all these whistling sounds and soft piano keys that kind of sound like snowfall. It's just a really good way to convey the setting of this story, but still done in the traditional vintage comedy music form. One of the funniest scenes in this for me is when they're on the roof and the landlord is awakened by what he can only presume are sex sounds. I don't know if that's actually the joke, but that's definitely how I read it and I find that funny. Is that childish? Maybe, but sex sounds are funny. Most of the comedy just comes from how all they're trying to do really is take a dog back inside, but that just leads to the most unforeseen, crazy circumstances you can imagine. I think this one really established a structure in comedy. The plot starts off so simple, they want to rescue a dog, and then through that the stakes just build and build, leading to more humorous sketches and scenarios. We still follow that narrative structure nowadays. You see that in modern sitcoms. You can't really go wrong with this one. It's a classic in my mind. Great setting, great narrative structure, and top-notch comedy acting, with a very questionable ending.
This is more than I can stand.
At number 4 we have All Quiet on the Western Front. This film is directed by Louis Milestone. He is mostly known for this film, but he also directed the original Of Mice and Men adaptation. This film is based on a book with the same name, and is one of the first talkies to really have a proper impact on audiences. It very much follows in the footsteps of Wings, using sound to bring the horrors of war to life. I really like the exploration of war in this one. This depiction of war is frankly just brutal. At the time this was quite controversial as it followed the perspective of German soldiers, which in a lot of audiences' minds they were still like, oh, they're the enemies. But I think it's a really valuable perspective, showing how these innocent school kids were essentially brainwashed into fighting for their country. They're all eager to fight for the fatherland, but then as the film goes on, the war just crushes them and destroys them. Like, there is some proper dark ideas being presented. At a certain point in the film I found myself wondering, is this character who survived all this horrific stuff actually better off than the person who died in the beginning? You know, he might not be dead, but the way that it's destroyed his mind, which one was better off? There's a lot of moments that just stick with you, lots of disturbing images. One that really sticks out is the arms on the barbed wire, which an extra told the director was something he'd actually seen in the war. The knife scene was pretty fucked up. The guy carrying his best friend, talking to him, not realising he's dead. You come out of it thinking, God, I've been through something. And you know, I was watching a film. How must the actual soldiers have felt? Come and See is a lot like that as well, and you can really see the inspiration here. As effective as all that is, I must admit, the acting, still a bit theatrical, still a bit stiff, which does break my immersion a bit, like seeing theatre actors in a really brutal war, bit of a weird contrast, and that does overall lessen the impact a bit.
It felt as if there were something electric running from the ground up through me. And I started. And I began to run hard, and I passed soldiers, and I heard voices calling them. And I ran, and I ran. And I felt as if I couldn't breathe enough air into me.
It doesn't ruin it for me though, because the atmosphere of the film is just that strong. Some stunning shots of the war-torn streets and just the battlefield, which the sounds of bombs and gunfire just complement beautifully. Now, there are 2 remakes of this film. I have not seen the 1970s one, but I did see the 22 one a few years ago. They both have their qualities, but the new one just feels nowhere near as original. The soundtrack just kind of sounds a bit like Fury, but not as good. The violence feels a bit cartoony. I think it does do a good job at modernising the characters, but as an overall experience, I much prefer the original. At number 3, we have Blotto, another fucking Laurel and Hardy film. So Stan and Ollie, they haven't really been able to hang out for a while. Stan's been stuck in his marriage with his, quite frankly, toxic wife. They've been living in Prohibition for a long time now, and they're starting to miss the good old days. So they hatch a plan to steal Stan's wife's liquor, but Stan's wife notices this, and so replaces the drink with, like, mustard, Tabasco, pepper. So after that's all set up, basically the film becomes watching Stan and Ollie placebo on alcohol. Remembering this film came out 7 years into Prohibition adds a lot of comedic context for me. The way that they react to this alcohol, you can sort of sense that there was a real strong nostalgia for alcohol at this point, and the way that the film explores that, I think, is brilliant. This film is overall very well made. There's lots of good sets, cool shots, good sequences. Nothing particularly striking, but serves the story very well. And it does feel more cinematic than some of the earlier films, like, say, Berth Marks. One of the first sketches in this film I really love, the phone call scene. Stan, obviously, ending the phone call is hilarious, but Ollie getting mad at the phone is flawless, and I think that deserves more praise. My favourite moment of Stan in this would probably be when he thinks he's drunk, and he starts getting emotional at the music.
You made me what I am today. I hope you're satisfied. You dragged and dragged me down until the soul within me died. You sheltered each and every dream. You fooled me from the start. And though you're not true.
Speaking of great performances, I really feel like I have to mention Anita Garvin. She does a great job of playing a dislikable wife. She absolutely nails it. The pace on this is perfect. You can boil it down to roughly 3 or 4 sketches, but each sketch being exploited in all the right ways, and never lingering, I noticed. In other Laurel and Hardy films, there'll be something going on and I'll be like, okay, I need the next thing now. This one, as soon as I started thinking like that, it just moved on to a new scenario. And I think that's what really helps this film. It doesn't really linger at all. They leave each scene on a high note and then jump straight onto the next sequence. A compact, short and funny film. I'd recommend this to anyone really, and I think it's a good thing to watch drunk. At number 2, we have Borderline. Firstly, the soundtrack I want to talk about. The version I watched was a BFI re-release, which came with its own original soundtrack. I literally didn't know that when I first started it. I was like, damn, this is like a jazzy, upbeat soundtrack for the 30s. But then suddenly hip-hop beats come in, and then I'm like, okay, this isn't original. I couldn't really find much information on the original soundtrack. I'm not even sure this film ever had a soundtrack. And the reason I mention all this is just because I think the music had a big impact on my enjoyment of this. But it's worth noting that this isn't even an original soundtrack. Maybe that jeopardizes the original product, but this soundtrack goes hard. This soundtrack is good. Like, I was just vibing with this film. I don't think I would have enjoyed this film nearly as much without this soundtrack. So whether or not it's really fair to put this high up in the list, I don't know. This BFI version, great. The editing in this, making use of Eisenstein's montage theory. But what I like about the montage theory here is it's not just being done to communicate tension, but rather to convey a very upbeat lifestyle. All that dynamic editing and quick cutting just makes you feel like you're in this hip 30s crowd. This film was also interesting in the way that it used black and white to explore the duality of the black and white protagonists. A lot of thought was clearly put into the presentation of this. So, okay, story-wise, Fawn, a white guy, has an affair with a black woman. People react differently. Some of them are just like, oh, you can't cheat, that's wrong, or you can't beat her, that's wrong. Then other people will use the scenario as a way to reinforce their racist prejudice. And so as an audience member, you're just witness to all these different perspectives, which is something I think was really missing from Within Our Gates. That was a very early black directed film I talked about. This film was directed by Kenneth McPherson, who is a white guy, but I think he did a really good job with the subject. At a certain point, I felt like I predicted the direction of the story, and I was overall right alright, but the way that it executed it really subverted my expectations. I'm gonna try and say what I thought about the ending without spoiling it. It managed to say so much without resorting to a courtroom drama or some kind of violent injustice. In a way, it was a happy ending, yet the message it leaves behind is ultimately sad. That ending left a very strong impression on me. The only way in which this film falls flat for me is just how the story's told in places. It is very hard to follow. I watched the whole film misunderstanding who was with who. I thought Ida was with the white guy Fawn, but that wasn't the case. Actually, the black woman and the black guy together, the white woman and the white guy together. I completely misunderstood some key parts of this story. However, I did understand the broad strokes of this story, the important parts, and those parts were incredibly powerful. Bit rough around the edges, but definitely the best film that I've seen explore racism from such a long time ago. At number 1, we have Brats, another Laurel and Hardy. So the story follows Stan and Ollie as normal. Their wives have left, and so they are in charge of the kids. Now that would be a perfectly fine Laurel and Hardy film, but they make it even better by having them play the kids as well. You've got little Laurel and Hardy and big Laurel and Hardy running around the same house. The way that they achieved this was by building 2 identical sets of different scales. It's quite clear and quite easy to see, but it works really well, and the principle of it is just funny. I think them playing the kids really makes this film a lot better. If it was just child actors, which in other Laurel and Hardy films they have done, that would just be nowhere near as interesting. It's great seeing Stan and Ollie be kids and then see them be adults, and you have this contrast, like them playing pool and then using building blocks with the exact same dynamic. And then you make that even better by having the 2 sides clashing. Some standout moments from this film, and there are a lot, would be the animated mouse and they're trying to shoot it. The pool game with the marshmallows. Great visual humour. It's so obvious where they're going with it, but it's just funny regardless. I also really enjoyed the scene when Ollie is singing his kids to bed. They get to utilise Ollie's singing talent in a comedic way.
Go to sleep, my baby, my baby,
My baby.
For such a short film, this is literally crammed with funny dialogue, slapstick humour, stunts, and all in perfect balance, I think. It's never too slow, it's never too like, oh, I'm watching the guy fall over again and again. It gets all those great Laurel and Hardy features and delivers it in perfect harmonisation. This might well be Laurel and Hardy's best short film. We haven't got onto the feature films yet, and that's a whole other can of worms. Well, I'm done. That's it. It's been a wonderful journey, but you know, I will miss the silent films. However, I will not miss silent films, because when I started this series, my original idea was like, let's do top 10 films of 2023, because 2023's just happened. But then I wanted to go back a bit more, and I kept on going back and back until I decided just to start from the beginning. Thank you so much to everyone who stuck with me for this journey. I think it's time we just sit back, reflect, and consider how far it is we've come.